File 26 of A Treatise of Human Nature, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by George Yeager. A Treatise of Human Nature by David Hume. Book 1, Part 3, Section 11, of the Probability of Chances. But in order to bestow on this system its full force and evidence, we must carry our eye from it a moment to consider its consequences and explain from the same principles some other species of reasoning which are derived from the same origin. Those philosophers who have divided human reason into knowledge and probability, and have defined the first to be that evidence which arises from the comparison of ideas, are obliged to comprehend all our arguments from causes or effects under the general term of probability.
Now, this is not exactly Hume's definition of knowledge. Those philosophers who divided human reason into knowledge and probability and have defined the first, meaning knowledge, to be that evidence which arises from the comparison of ideas. I wouldn't be in agreement with that kind of definition of knowledge. And I suppose that Hume isn't either, because he's sort of referring to somebody else's philosophy. Are obliged to comprehend all our arguments from causes or effects under the general term of probability. Okay, so I'll keep this one, but it's not a big one so far.
But though every one be free to use his terms in what sense he pleases, and accordingly, in the precedent part of this discourse, I have followed this method of expression, it is, however, certain that in common discourse we readily affirm that many arguments from causation exceed probability and may be received as a superior kind of evidence. One would appear ridiculous who would say that it is only probable the sun will rise tomorrow, or that all men must die, though it is plain we have no further assurance of these facts than what experience affords us. For this reason, it would perhaps be more convenient, in order at once to preserve the common signification of words, and mark the several degrees of evidence, to distinguish human reason into three kinds. That is, that from knowledge, from proofs, and from probabilities. By knowledge, I mean...
Okay, so now we get down to some business here, right? There's this one up here. One would appear ridiculous. One would appear ridiculous who would say that it is only probable the sun will rise tomorrow, or that all men must die. Though it is plain we have no further assurance of these facts. Well, they cannot be facts then, right? Than what experience affords us. I like his thinking. I'm not sure it's strict enough to the level I want strictness around these parts, right? But it's sort of a matter of the use of words. And so, as I pointed out in the recent part, for instance, the understanding of morals back in the day was different from how we understand morality now. So the meaning of the terms might be presupposed by me and others, and the understanding of his argumentation might not be completely in concordance with what he was actually thinking back then, right? So, but with that in mind, or with that, disclaimer, one would, to repeat it, one would appear ridiculous if you were to say that it's only probable that the sun will rise tomorrow, or that all men must die. Though it is plain we have no further assurance of these facts than what experience affords us. Okay, it cannot be a fact if it's something about the future. That's impossible, Mr. Empiricist, right? Absolutely, and I would have liked he would have used a different term than fact. I mean, what could fact be other than something that you have arrived at using the idea of knowledge? If something is considered knowledge, then that which the knowledge refers to is a fact. If I say that's an elephant, I would consider that knowledge, and the fact part of that is elephant, right? But I'm not. If I'm saying what will happen tomorrow or tonight or whatever, it cannot be a fact because I can't point to it. It's in the future. The future is something that I imagine. I cannot point to my mind and say there's an elephant, right? I could, but you wouldn't be experiencing an elephant. You would say it's false, right? But with these terminologies aside, what he's pointing to is when he says, we have no further assurance of these facts, these aspects, than what experience affords us. Exactly. We have to experience it in order to have access to it. Now, one other thing that he's pointing out, maybe not clarifying too much, but you cannot give a probability to the future, right? In something that is, you can say, if you're sitting here, the probability that what happens in the future is this. But when it happens, it is not a probability. It is whatever case it is, right? It didn't happen because it had a high probability. It happened because it happened, right? Probability is an abstraction of, in order to signify the likeliness of something happening, right? If it's very likely that the sun is going to go up tomorrow, right? I don't want to use that term. If it's very likely it's going to rain tomorrow for whatever reason, well, then you will make some judgment of what you're going to reason about and what actions you're going to take in order to accommodate that which you consider probable, right? But in this case, what he should point to is not a probability, but whether or not you can know that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? If you cannot point to that, it's unknowable, right? That doesn't mean that the sun won't rise tomorrow. That's a very important aspect to make sure that. I have to get some juice onto this laptop here, right? It's an important aspect of. I don't know why my stream recording is so jittery. I hope it doesn't come up jittery when it's done. Okay, I have closed all other apps, so it should be as clean as a thing to record from as possible. That it's there's a lot to unpack in this, or you could possibly say that it's pointing towards, right? It's this thing about certainty, probability, and knowledge that all seems to melt together in some kind of gumbo, right? Saying that you cannot know something doesn't mean it cannot happen, right? Or it cannot be the case. That's not the point. The point is to justify when it is knowledge and when it isn't, right? And what part of your experience at that point can be considered knowledge and what cannot, right? And in order to help you with that, you need to have an idea of the metaphysics and maybe the ontology or whatever you want to call it before you venture into defining what you mean by knowledge using a philosophy called epistemology, right? That's a lot of what is packed in there, right? But he lifts the lid a bit on supposedly that it might be, you should possibly be very concerned with what you mean by knowledge. And I like that that skepticism and rigidity, maybe I could say, right? Then there was down here, distinguish human reason into three kinds. Knowledge, proof, and probability. And by knowledge, he says, maybe I should play the book.
The assurance arising from the comparison of ideas. By proofs, those arguments.
Okay, so by knowledge, he means the assurance arising from the comparison of ideas. I don't understand that, to be honest. It doesn't sound like it's in any accordance with how I would understand knowledge. Maybe it's because we have different understanding by what we mean by knowledge. I think it has to do with like the idea of knowledge being a library of, when did Caesar die, and when did, Avicenna live, and when did the first airplane do this and that and the other, right? That being kind of knowledge. I wouldn't consider that knowledge, because it can't be. It's some kind of memory, right? But I'll let it pass for now, because it's not particularly clear to me what he means.
Which are derived from the relation of cause and effect, and which are entirely free from doubt and uncertainty.
Okay, by proofs, he means those arguments which are derived from the relation of cause and effect, and which are entirely free from doubt and uncertainty. So they're certain, and you can't doubt it. So, okay, so if you have these ideas, as he's talked about earlier, or I've been talking and using so far, right? So, knowledge is when you compare the ideas. And proof is when you derive a relation between the ideas, right? So, could be an interesting avenue. I think this kind of definition suffers a bit from what I would call a slightly dysfunctional reduction base or starting point, right? His dichotomy of impressions and ideas. I think that the idea of knowledge, I'm still hesitating to, put my head on the block, right? And I'm maybe more on board with the proof that it's about relations, that if you have a brick at this height on the Eiffel Tower, then the brick will, if you throw it, it will fall and it will hit the ground there and at this particular time, interval and duration, whatever, right? That is sort of a connection between ideas and how they behave, so to say, right? I would be on board with proving that beyond doubt and uncertainty, that when you repeat this sufficiently, it keeps being the case that the brick will fall this way from the Eiffel Tower, right? And you say, okay, the law is this, that, and the other, right? And then you prove it by, sort of mathematically, I guess you can prove that a formula condenses into something that is, whatever, E equals mc squared, or, whatever, right? Or what is the formula for time in free fall? It is the distance equals half of the accelerations time squared, or something like that, right? Okay, so far so good.
By probability, that evidence which is still attended with uncertainty. It is this last species of reasoning I proceed to examine.
Okay, so he's quite clear actually about what he's attempting to do, and that I like that approach, right? And he mentioned knowledge, proof, and probability, and then he defines each of them and say, "I'm going to head on with probability." That's a very, very decent way of arguing, I find, right? Probability, that evidence, which is still attended with uncertainty, it is this last. So attended with uncertainty. So it's standing next to uncertainty, or there's uncertainty about whether or not it is the case. So probability is still a little fluffy in his philosophical approach here, but it's about that which you can know, but is not sure about yet, right? Or maybe can't be sure about, but maybe or maybe not. I don't know, right? So at least he has classified pretty strongly what he means, right?
Probability, or reasoning from conjecture, may be divided into two kinds. That is, that which is founded on chance, and that which arises from causes. We shall consider each of these in order. The idea of cause and effect is derived from experience, which, presenting us with certain objects constantly conjoined with each other, produces such a habit of surveying them in that relation that we cannot, without a sensible violence, survey them in any other. On the other hand, as chance is nothing real in itself, and, properly speaking, is merely the negation of a cause, its influence on the mind is contrary to that of causation, and it is essential to it to leave the imagination perfectly indifferent, either to consider the existence or non-existence of that object which is regarded as contingent. A cause traces the way to our thought, and in a manner forces us to survey such certain objects in such certain relations. Chance can only destroy this determination of the thought and leave the mind in its native situation of indifference, in which, upon the absence of a cause, it is instantly reinstated.
I would like to extend a bit about, chance probability. There's a difference between chance. I don't know. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there isn't. But chance is not about the objects. They are there or they aren't there, right? That which you can have knowledge about, in my opinion, should be defined, and that which is either the case or not the case. When the thing is either the case or not the case, and if you experience something, then or that is the part of your experience which you have labeled as knowledge. In my opinion, it should either be the case or not the case, and being the case or not the case is binary. It's not a matter of degree. But chance or probability, or whatever these terms are sort of mixed, right, is a prediction of whether it will be one or the other. But when you get to that point, it is either one or it is the other. It's not 70% one or the other, right? So just keep this in mind. It's sort of obvious, kind of, I guess, right? But I just want to stress that.
Since, therefore, an entire indifference is essential to chance, no one chance can possibly be superior to another, otherwise than as it is composed of a superior number of equal chances. For if we affirm that one chance can, after any other manner, be superior to another, we must at the same time affirm that there is something which gives it the superiority and determines the event rather to that side than the other. That is, in other words, we must allow of a cause and destroy the supposition of chance, which we had before established. A perfect and total indifference is essential to chance, and one total indifference can never in itself be either superior or inferior to another. This truth is not peculiar to my system, but is acknowledged by everyone that forms calculations concerning chances. And here it is remarkable that though chance and causation be directly contrary, yet it is impossible for us to conceive this combination of chances which is requisite to render one hazard superior to another, without supposing a mixture of causes among the chances, and a conjunction of necessity in some particulars with a total indifference in others. Where nothing limits the chances, every notion that the most extravagant fancy can form is upon a footing of equality. Nor can there be any circumstance to give one the advantage above another. Thus, unless we allow that there are some causes to make the dice fall and preserve their form in their fall, and lie upon some one of their sides, we can form no calculation concerning the laws of hazard. But supposing these causes to operate, and supposing likewise all the rest to be indifferent and to be determined by chance, it is easy to arrive at a notion of a superior combination of chances. A die that has 4 sides marked with a certain number of spots, and only 2 with another, affords us an obvious and easy instance of this superiority. The mind is here limited by the causes to such a precise number and quality of the events, and at the same time is undetermined in its choice of any particular event. Proceeding then in that reasoning, wherein we have advanced 3 steps, that chance is merely the negation of a cause, and produces a total indifference in the mind, that one negation of a cause and one total indifference can never be superior or inferior to another, and that there must always be a mixture of causes among the chances in order to be the foundation of any reasoning. We are next to consider what effect a superior combination of chances can have upon the mind, and after what manner it influences our judgment and opinion. Here we may repeat all the same arguments we employed in examining that belief which arises from causes, and may prove after the same manner that a superior number of chances produces our assent neither by demonstration nor probability. It is indeed evident that we can never, by the comparison of mere ideas, make any discovery which can be of consequence in this affair, and that it is impossible to prove with certainty that any event must fall on that side where there is a superior number of chances. To suppose in this case any certainty were to overthrow what we have established concerning the opposition of chances and their perfect equality and indifference. Should it be said that though in an opposition of chances it is impossible to determine with certainty on which side the event will fall, yet we can pronounce with certainty that it is more likely and probable it will be on that side where there is a superior number of chances than where there is an inferior? Should this be said, I would ask, what is here meant by likelihood and probability? The likelihood and probability of chances is a superior number of equal chances, and consequently, when we say it is likely the event will fall on the side which is superior rather than on the inferior, we do no more than affirm that where there is a superior number of chances, there is actually a superior, and where there is an inferior, there is an inferior, which are identical propositions and of no consequence. The question is, by what means a superior number of equal chances operates upon the mind and produces belief or assent, since it appears that it is neither by arguments derived from demonstration nor from probability. In order to clear up this difficulty, we shall suppose a person to take a die formed after such a manner as that 4 of its sides are marked with one figure or one number of spots, and 2 with another, and to put this die into the box with an intention of throwing it. It is plain he must conclude the one figure to be more probable than the other, and give the preference to that which is inscribed on the greatest number of sides. He, in a manner, believes that this will lie uppermost, though still with hesitation and doubt in proportion to the number of chances which are contrary. And according as these contrary chances diminish, and the superiority increases on the other side, his belief acquires new degrees of stability and assurance. This belief arises from an operation of the mind upon the simple and limited object before us, and therefore its nature will be the more easily discovered and explained. We have nothing but one single die to contemplate in order to comprehend one of the most curious operations of the understanding. This die, formed as above, contains 3 circumstances worthy of our attention. First, certain causes such as gravity, solidity, a cubical figure, etc., which determine it to fall, to preserve its form in its fall, and to turn up one of its sides. Secondly, a certain number of sides which are supposed indifferent. Thirdly, a certain figure inscribed on each side. These 3 particulars form the whole nature of the die so far as relates to our present purpose, and consequently are the only circumstances regarded by the mind in its forming a judgment concerning the result of such a throw. Let us, therefore, consider gradually and carefully what must be the influence of these circumstances on the thought and imagination. First, we have already observed that the mind is determined by custom to pass from any cause to its effect, and that upon the appearance of the one, it is almost impossible for it not to form an idea of the other. Their constant conjunction in past instances has produced such a habit in the mind that it always conjoins them in its thought, and infers the existence of the one from that of its usual attendant. When it considers the die as no longer supported by the box, it cannot without violence regard it as suspended in the air, but naturally places it on the table and views it as turning up one of its sides. This is the effect of the intermingled causes which are requisite to our forming any calculation concerning chances. Secondly, it is supposed that though the die be necessarily determined to fall and turn up one of its sides, yet there is nothing to fix the particular side, but that this is determined entirely by chance. The very nature and essence of chance is a negation of causes, and the leaving the mind in a perfect indifference among those events which are supposed contingent. When, therefore, the thought is determined by the causes to consider the die as falling and turning up one of its sides, the chances present all these sides as equal, and make us consider every one of them, one after another, as alike probable and possible. The imagination passes from the cause, that is, the throwing of the die, to the effect, that is, the turning up one of the 6 sides, and feels a kind of impossibility both of stopping short in the way and of forming any other idea. But as all these 6 sides are incompatible, and the die cannot turn up above one at once, this principle directs us not to consider all of them at once as lying uppermost, which we look upon as impossible. Neither does it direct us with its entire force to any particular side, for in that case this side would be considered as certain and inevitable. But it directs us to the whole 6 sides after such a manner as to divide its force equally among them. We conclude in general that some one of them must result from the throw. We run all of them over in our minds. The determination of the thought is common to all, but no more of its force falls to the share of any one than what is suitable to its proportion with the rest. It is after this manner the original impulse, and consequently the vivacity of thought, arising from the causes, is divided and split in pieces by the intermingled chances. We have already seen the influence of the 2 first qualities of the die, that is, the causes and the number and indifference of the sides, and have learned how they give an impulse to the thought, and divide that impulse into as many parts as there are units in the number of sides. We must now consider the effects of the 3rd particular, that is, the figures inscribed on each side. It is evident that where several sides have the same figure inscribed on them, they must concur in their influence on the mind, and must unite upon one image or idea of a figure all those divided impulses that were dispersed over the several sides upon which that figure is inscribed. Were the question only what side will be turned up, these are all perfectly equal, and no one could ever have any advantage above another. But as the question is concerning the figure, and as the same figure is presented by more than one side, it is evident that the impulses belonging to all these sides must reunite in that one figure and become stronger and more forcible by the union. 4 sides are supposed in the present case to have the same figure inscribed on them, and 2 to have another figure. The impulses of the former are, therefore, superior to those of the latter. But as the events are contrary, and it is impossible both these figures can be turned up, the impulses likewise become contrary, and the inferior destroys the superior as far as its strength goes. The vivacity of the idea is always proportionable to the degrees of the impulse or tendency to the transition, and belief is the same with the vivacity of the idea according to the precedent doctrine. End of file 26.
Okay, that was one long, very meticulous description of the throwing of a dice. But I see that he's pointing a bit to sort of cognitive science, and it's no wonder he's considered one of the founding fathers of cognitive science, right? Cognitive philosophy. But if you paint something in a certain way, you are going to expect to understand it that way, right? Like, if it's the problem of interpretation of signals that is being modulated and presented on a screen, right? When you see an oscillator, you are seeing some kind of representation that has already been classified as a functional model of what is going on, and therefore it conforms to the model. But then if you start to say, well, there are waves out there, then you would be wrong, because it cannot possibly be that which is described as a model, right? Because that is what is functional on a screen. So it's it has, I think, something to do with what the chances are for something is based on how you want to interpret it, right? If you interpret that, is there a side that is turning up on the die, on the dice, I get we would call it nowadays, then it's 100%. There's always something that is pointing up, right? But if there have been put patterns on each of the sides, then if there are 4 sides with one pattern, 2 sides with another pattern, it's, if you're looking for which pattern is upwards this time and the next time and the next time and the next time, well then, it's more likely that it's the one with the 4 patterns that the 2 pattern, right? And because they are of the same interpretation, each of these sides, you see it as more likely that it's one or the other, but it depends on the interpretation, right? And I might also, point you towards something called the gambler's fallacy, I think it's called, right? That if something happened now, and you have an idea of probability, right? If we say that in the case of the die here, 4 sides have one symbol and 2 sides that have another symbol. Let's say you throw the dice 4 times in a row, and in these 4 times, the symbol of the 4 of that symbol, which is on 4 sides, turned up each of these 4 times. That doesn't mean that the next 2 times must be the 2 other ones, right? You reset the chance each time of the throw, right? If you say it's 4-2, right? Or what is it? 4 out of 6, what is that? Whatever, right? 60% chance. No, it's something different, right? But it's a third. No, it's 2/3. That is 66%, right? There's a 66% chance each time you throw. And if it comes up this or that, that's just, whatever, right? It's binary, basically. In that sense, it can only be one or the other. And each time there's a 66%, but if you have the same thing 4 times in a row, doesn't mean that the 2 other things must appear now, right? It might just as well be that 4 times symbol the next 2 times also, right? Okay. This is the end of, what was that? Part 11, and we're going into, let me check out the length of part 12 and see if we can fit it in here. No, I don't think we can. It is more than half an hour long in the audiobook. So let me just say, I'll see you in the next one.